So today we're starting, in a sense, a new topic, though the topic of the Holocaust is one that we introduced on the very first session as well. So in a sense, it's been a recurring theme through the course. And I'd like to have a really kind of a deep conversation today about how to think about the Holocaust and what we need to understand about the Holocaust and the Nazi period, but also the Soviet period, the dictatorship of the Soviet Union, the deliberate starvation policies, which Tim Snyder describes in Bloodlands, which led to the deaths of 4 to 6 million Ukrainian and other peasant people, farmer people. These are horrifying elements of the 20th century, which we're reading about today. And so I'm eager to have us kind of figure out what our intellectual and practical and moral stance should be towards these facts about human history of the past 100 years or 75 years. Before we get started directly in discussing the materials that you've read, I'm really curious to know what kind of reading and learning you've done about the Holocaust and about the horrors of the Second World War period previously. Is this something which was a part of your study of history in high school, for example? Did you study world history or 20th century history in high school? Mahil, how about you?
Well, I did study world history, but it was more towards like world religions kind of thing, where we study like diverse like eras, including Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam. We didn't go much in depth with the Holocaust as we are doing this class, because I remember just reading off like the history textbooks where they explain like just straight facts and that's it. They didn't really give much interpretation of the evils like we're doing.
I see. Okay, that's interesting. And how about other people? Would you say that Mahil's experience is kind of similar to your own? How about you, Austin or Tabitha? What do you think?
Just joined, so I didn't hear what the question was.
So I was asking Mahil how much study of the Holocaust and the other atrocities and horrors of the 20th century he had done in history. And he said not very much, really, in high school. I wonder about other people, about you, Austin, or Tabitha, about you or Evelyn.
I know that in my like high school world history class and English class, I read Night by Elie Wiesel, and we studied the Holocaust a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually, they actually, for my world history class, there was a whole couple, like probably 2 or 3 weeks just focused around World War II and the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for English, we had to write on that book Night a couple of times. So I studied it quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So that's very different from Mahil's experience. How about other people?
For me, the last time I took any sort of world history class was my freshman year of high school. And even then, we didn't really talk about the Holocaust specifically very much. I think I learned about it a little bit more in like middle school. That was when I read The Diary of Anne Frank. And that was when I went to the Holocaust Museum in DC.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of had the same experience as Mahil, where I didn't really learn much about it in depth.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds so if you were able to visit the Holocaust Museum and also had a little bit of a curriculum in middle school, that is some learning. You might be interested to know that one of the founders of this course, Sid Belkowski, a history professor, created a curriculum on the Holocaust and survivor testimonies, which was used, and I think is still being used in a number of schools around the state. Jason is having a hard time getting in for some reason. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I may send him a message and see if there's a different way of getting in. Actually, Jason, are you in now? Sorry to, so let me message to Jason. Okay, let's try one more time. Sorry, this is kind of a technical glitch, but I hate to leave anybody sitting in the waiting room. Yeah, he's just not getting in, so I got to try this again. Well, let's see what goes on there. So my reason for asking this question is that I have come to believe that the horrors of the 20th century are really different from other centuries, from earlier periods of human history, and that that it's really crucial for us as human beings to try to figure out, both to confront the realities of the Holocaust and the war of starvation, which the Soviet Union exercised, that it's really crucial for us to try to understand those periods of history, and certainly not as a culture to forget them or to minimize them in some way. And of course, once you've read Tim Snyder, once you've read, there's some other really powerful recent history books about the Holocaust. Once you've read those books, the Ordinary Men book also is just hauntingly difficult to read. I believe the Christopher Browning book about these very ordinary policemen from Germany who became part of a killing unit in ways that are almost impossible to understand. So what I'm kind of urging us to think about in this course is that this is really posing for us a question about history, a question about humanity, and a question about kind of what sort of mental relationship or cultural relationship we should have to these facts of human atrocity, and human atrocity on a gigantic scale. So Jason is still struggling to get in. I think what I'm going to do is suggest that he maybe call me on my phone and he can participate in a different way. So let's see if that works. It's like being stranded in space when you can't get somebody into your Zoom room. But it's definitely not working for him. I have no idea why that would be, but it is. So that's the introduction I wanted to make, that these horrifying events and circumstances of the 20th century, which we've read just a little bit about. We read about it in connection with Mark Bloch. We read some of Tim Snyder's book right at the beginning of the semester, and we've referred at various times to the Holocaust and to the mass extermination of the Jews, to the concentration camps, to the killing zones of Eastern Europe. We've referred to these pieces of European history. And what I'm kind of asking us to do today and next time is to focus in on, what does this mean to us? What does it need to mean to us? What would it mean, for example, to Mark Bloch, a man who was both an historian and also a man who struggled and fought against the Nazi regime and eventually was murdered by the Nazi regime? How can we kind of put that together and then make human sense out of it? So let me just see if I can get any kind of thoughts that you have in terms of, is the Holocaust like, oh, I don't know, reading about something which occurred in the 17th century and it was pretty horrible? A king who killed a bunch of prisoners, an atrocity. Is the Holocaust like that, an event of, a terrible, brutal, cruel thing, but just a part of history? Is that a way of trying to understand the Holocaust? Or do we need to have a different historical understanding of it? Let me ask you that question. Ray, I often turn to you because I think you think deeply about questions like this. So what do you think? Is the Holocaust comparable to an event when a king of France captured a bunch of prisoners? I'm not even thinking of a real incident, I'm giving you a hypothetical. And then in a fit of anger, he had 50 officers put to death. Terrible thing, horrible thing, a crime of war, a crime of inhumanity. Should we understand the Holocaust in those terms, or is that kind of trivializing the Holocaust?
So I think that's the way we understand it now, or at least based on our education, that's how I understood it. It was just something that happened and it was unfortunate. I focused on just the number of victims. I depersonalized everyone. I didn't see them as real. I saw them as human beings, but I didn't realize the connection that we really had. So I think that it's different in that sense. Like the explanation or the example you just gave is, first of all, it's like a single person that just put everyone to death on a whim, basically. But this was very much a calculated genocide, and it included so many people joining in. It was a lot of brainwashing, a lot of mental, I don't know how to explain it, but is it making sense? I don't know. I think that the example you just described is how I would have thought about it based on my education in middle school. Mm-hmm. Very depersonalized, something that happened a while ago, but we really need to understand, it hits a little harder to home. I don't know what I'm saying. It hits different when you understand that these are ordinary people. And when you read books like that and you're understanding how it all came to be and how different people were involved, like Eichmann, for example, just how certain events in his life, I feel, made him a lot more vulnerable to be a part of the Nazi Party. Just understanding the ordinariness of the people involved and how similar they are to us really opens it up in a way that I think is really important for us to
So, and a part of what you're saying, I think, is that's one of the ideas that I wanted to get to today, and that is the question of how do we, in the year 2020, as people who did not experience the Holocaust, how do we have a human relationship to those innocent people? There's a wonderful title of a book that is about the Holocaust. It's about France, but it's called Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed. And it's about a particular village of religious people in France who risked their lives to save the lives of Jewish children. And so the title is a beautiful title, Lest Innocent Lives Be Shed. But that's what the Holocaust was on a vast scale. It was killing children, women, men, adults, old men, young men, old women, in great indignity, young women. It was killing people on a vast scale. And therefore, I'm kind of suggesting to you that we need to have a different human understanding of it than one instance of a horrible murder. it's a horrible murder is horrible. But the Holocaust and the starvation deaths of the Holodomor, the starvation of the Ukrainian peasants, and we could mention a number of other crimes against humanity. We could mention the 300 years of slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, a seminar which will be going on next semester with Joe Lunn. We could mention some human horrors which require what Ray just proposed to us, that we need to understand them in a way which is more personal. We need to understand the individual tragedies. Nikita, I think you mentioned Anne Frank. And a lot of us have read that novel, and we can kind of put ourselves in the situation of a girl, a young person, a young woman. I don't know, she was 12 or 14 years old. I don't remember really. She was a young teenager, I think. And the fear and the risk which she was undertaking, not undertaking voluntarily, but she was just subject to this deadly risk of being taken away and killed. There's a human empathy, a human sympathy, which we would like to be able to have each other understand in a way which goes beyond simply, and a lot of people were killed and it was very cruel, it was a terrible time of history, turn the page. In other words, there's a deeper kind of understanding. That's part of what I'm proposing to us, that as we try to understand the 20th century, we need to somehow put ourselves in a situation where we have a deeper human understanding, a deeper willingness to open ourselves up to the real human experience of these men and women, children, boys and girls, infants, the whole of humanity who were dragged from their villages and shot in ditches, dragged from their villages, put on trains, put in gas chambers, jammed into churches. The churches were burned. 5,000 people, 3,000 people at once were killed. The immensity of this horror, and the fact that each of those persons was a living human being who did nothing to warrant any kind of punishment, let alone this torture and death which they experienced. I'm not even getting the words quite right, but I would invite you to help me find the language. Is it empathy that I'm inviting you to experience? Is that the best word, or is there a better word that you can think of?
I think you said something else that's really important. You said willingness, and I think really that is key. Personally, when I talk to friends, even family members, about different acts of racism or even things like the Holocaust, where it was just such wickedness, a lot of times I hear back, well, why do I have to think about it? And what is my thinking about it going to do for the people who were victims? So why should I even bring myself to experience such discomfort? Because it really is discomforting and disturbing, really, to think about the horror. Mm-hmm. So I think willingness is really the first step, and seeing why that is important. And even sometimes I struggle in explaining that, no, we need to understand these things. So I think willingness is really the key to making it more personal.
And willingness is itself it's an action on your part. It's an action on my part. I've had extensive conversations with a man who's an historian of 20th century German, of the Nazi period, basically. And he has shared with me how emotionally difficult it is for historians to study this period, because it's just filled with such horror. We hate to read and think about and put ourselves in the situation of human beings as victims, human beings. And I think we could talk for a minute about, is victim the right word to use? Because it kind of diminishes the humanity of the person who has been killed or tortured and killed or enslaved. But the emotional difficulty which historians have, well, I think you as young people in reading these materials, I'm sure you had some difficulty reading Christopher Browning's book of the things. You didn't read very much of it. In fact, I probably should have given you more. I hesitated to ask you to read too much. But it's quite horrible to read what these men who were just kind of ordinary, decent bus drivers and cops and fathers, and in some cases lawyers, and just ordinary people from Germany who were asked to participate in mass killings of several thousand Jews in this particular town, not required to do it. There was nobody with a machine gun saying, either go out and kill these Jews or you yourself will be killed. No, they were given a choice and they did it. Isn't that horrific to read that and to wonder, how is that possible for ordinary people to do such a thing? It's difficult to read that kind of material. It's difficult to read of children being led into a gas chamber or into a shooting pit. It's difficult for that matter to read, as we do actually occasionally in Snyder, to read of, there's a vignette that I'm remembering of a girl who was, brought to a killing pit in Poland or the Ukraine, and machine guns were used to kill. She was a survivor in the sense that she was not killed, but she was under dozens of bodies and covered with blood. And she finally was able to, when all the shooting was done, she was able to push her way through. And think of the horror of that. And it's not that I'm asking, I'm not trying to be cruel to you. What I'm trying to convey is what seems to me really important, that we need to have that courage that Ray was referring to understand the real human reality. Why so? What's the benefit? That, Ray, you said that people sometimes ask, why should we do that? It's horrible to think about, it's painful to think about. Why do we need to? Why do you think we might need to think about how did the Holocaust happen? What might be of value in doing that? Can anybody think of a value, a benefit that comes from thinking hard about the Holocaust?
I know a lot of mindset and a lot of people is a lot of these bad things, even like in our present day, like if on the news, you hear a lot of bad things going on and people think, well, that's not going to happen to me. That's terrible, but it would never happen to me. I'm sure all these Jewish people living in Europe never thought that one day 6 million of them would just die. And they, no one would ever think, oh, that would happen to me. So I think one crucial aspect of it is that the reality of the Holocaust, that, yeah, this happened to real ordinary people. This could happen again if you're not careful. It could happen to someone like you and me, like who knows when, who knows where, who knows why. I think it's important to study like all of those aspects to make sure, to stop it and to realize that this could happen to me or you, like that could have been us, that could have been anyone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's really the most important thing, isn't it? That this is something that happened. It happened in Poland, Ukraine, Germany, Austria. The plan, the Wannsee Conference plan, was to find every Jew in every European country and kill them. And it happened. It is an historical reality. And so if it happened once, what do we do today to ensure that it never happens again? I'm sure you've heard what is an expression in Israel, and it's an expression among Jews all over the world, never again. And never again, what does that mean? It actually can mean several different things. What do you think it might mean? Never again. You kind of said it, Austin, so I'll put it back to you. If I'm an American Jew, which I'm not, but I can put myself in the mindset of an American Jew, and I say to my grandchildren, never again, what do you think I might mean by that?
I think never again. It's easy to say like never again will this happen, but it's like, okay, like how are you going to stop that? I think it means never again, like we will not, even like let, like if they see something close to that happen again, you will not let that happen again. Like you'll see the warning signs, you'll, and I think this goes back to why I said Holocaust. The Holocaust. You need to know what happened leading up to it, why it happened. And so all those things, we understand that, then you can kind of stop something like that from happening again. Because you can see the warning signs and say, okay, this is going down a dangerous road, you know. So I think that's what they mean. Never again. Like, be careful, be on the lookout, like, because it could happen again. Who knows? But just never again, in the sense that don't let that happen again. Don't let that atrocity, you know, take over so many people again.
Right. Okay, good. So in Israel, when it's said, when never again is said, it's said in a way which is about self-defense. We Jews will never allow this to happen to Jews again. We will be strong. We will have a strong military in the country of our people, Israel, and we will not permit a genocidal attack on Jews to occur again, never again. That's one meaning of never again. We non-Jewish Americans, we might have a different idea in mind. Anybody know what, no, I think you don't, because we've already established that you haven't been invited to learn very much about the history of this period. Was the United States exemplar in its active resistance to the occurrence of the Holocaust and the killings of the Jews? Do you know anything about what the United States did in the 1939, 1940, 1941, once the United States even was in the war? Good work, US. Nice job. Yes or no?
I heard that they weren't even very receptive to people who were escaping.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's like the extent of my knowledge there, but I heard they weren't even very receptive. So
you're absolutely right. The US did not welcome Jewish refugees in large numbers. It did welcome intellectuals like Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt came to the United States in 1941. I think that's what I put into the slides. So there were Jewish emigres who came to the United States in the 30s into the 40s. But in terms of large numbers of just ordinary Jewish people who were fleeing for their lives, the US did not change its immigration laws, did not make it easier for Jews to escape to the United States. So the US didn't play a positive role in terms of immigration or emigration. It also didn't play a strong role in terms of military action. The US, I'm sorry to say it, it's not something I am happy to be able to say, but the US was aware, the US government was aware that there were killing places, that mass killing of Jews and other populations as well, but especially mass killings, genocidal killings of Jews occurring in Europe. And the United States really took the view, we can't intervene directly. All we can do is defeat Germany. And tragically, in a period of time when several million Jews were being killed, the United States continued to wage war against Germany, but it didn't take specific military actions that would have disrupted the flow of Jews into concentration camps. It didn't take actions which might have stemmed the flow. In other words, we did not intervene in the killings of the Jews. We continued to wage war against Germany, but we didn't intervene specifically to end a genocidal time. Never again. We might say a democratic government also needs to say never again. What other genocides do you know about? Are there other genocides that you've heard of before? How about Rwanda, for example? Who knows anything about Rwanda? We've talked about it a little bit before, I know, so some of you do. Ray, yeah, go ahead and give us a little bit of.
Oh, so I really do not know a lot about that. I never learned about it in school, so it's really just my parents talking about it. But I know that it was between two tribes. I forget the name, but it was basically one tribe targeting another. Yeah. So it was one tribe targeting another, and they were very like awful killing methods used as well. And there's also a movie, Hotel Rwanda, that kind of portrays around that time. But yeah, it was similar. It was one group targeting another using very ghastly methods of killing to basically exterminate the other tribe.
Okay. And if we were to say never again, we Europeans, we North Americans, we Canadians, we United States government, we are committed to never again. What would be an appropriate governmental action when genocide is occurring in Rwanda? Intervene or not intervene? Actually, before I ask you that, let's get one other genocidal period on the table, which had a slightly different outcome, and that is in Bosnia, the Serb attacks on Muslim people, again, men, women, children, boys of pre-military age, young men of military age, large-scale killings, not millions of people, but thousands of people killed by the Serbs in the former Yugoslavia. This was in the 1990s. Anybody aware of that? Croatia, Bosnia, the wars, I guess some people would call them civil wars that occurred in Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Is that familiar to you or not familiar? Okay, so I'm bringing a piece of history to you that I'm a little inexact about. I can't give you a ton of details, though I'd be happy to put together a new slide presentation on the genocide of the genocidal war, which was conducted by the Serbian government against Muslim minority. But the bottom line is that in the early 1990s, the army and these horrible killing paramilitaries, which had different names in Serbia, would round up and kill small groups and large groups of Muslims in Bosnia, Croatia, Herzegovina. Now, in this instance, it was pretty widely known that genocidal killing was occurring, and NATO and the United States did intervene. This was during the time of Bill Clinton's presidency. And in fact, there was a military intervention. It was a bombing intervention against the Serbian government. So there was an effort to interfere with and stop the genocidal attack on the Muslims of Bosnia, and then to bring war crimes trials against the president of Serbia and other political leaders and military leaders. Never again. So that's another way of understanding never again, that national governments should be concerned about genocidal attacks on religious or ethnic or national minorities, and should be prepared, as the United Nations Charter gives a right, should be prepared to intervene on behalf of the innocent. That would be another way of thinking about never again. Here's a third way of thinking about it, and it's a more roundabout way. If what we're interested in understanding is what actually did lead to the political and military goal of the Nazi government to exterminate the Jews, what gave rise to the goal and what gave rise to the capacity, well, maybe we can make a little more progress in terms of understanding the motivations and the administrative and organizational capacity, the military capacity, which made genocide possible. So, okay, so my first topic, which I wanted to kind of unfold with you, is the importance, I think it's deeply, profoundly important for us as human beings to take the reality of the Holocaust very, very intimately, very seriously, very personally, and to allow ourselves to be moved and to be empathetic to the sufferings of these innocent people who were targeted in the way that they were. And maybe that also then makes us more sympathetic to the victims of the Rwandan genocide while it's ongoing. Maybe it makes us more willing to think, yes, we must take some active role in Bosnia 2,000 Muslims killed at a time with machine guns. That can't be allowed. We must intervene. Maybe this desire to be willing to confront the human, emotional, personal realities of mass killings and mass atrocity and genocidal. The term that was used in Bosnia was ethnic cleansing. Anybody able to take a shot at explaining what you think ethnic cleansing would be? What is ethnic cleansing?
It's kind of like, isn't it the perception that, you know, if someone's not like you, they're almost like dirty in a sense, where it's like it's not clean. So you need to have your race there in order to keep cleanliness, quote unquote.
Okay, so that's one possibility. Another possibility is that it's in a society in which you have a mixed population of Hutus and Tutsis, or of Muslims and Christians, or of Serbs and Croatians. Ethnic cleansing is a military political strategy of forcing the populations apart, forcing them apart in part through murder, so that the Muslim population is expelled by violence against them, or it's simply threat. We're planning to burn your villages, so run or die. Move to a different part of Europe or die. That's referred to as ethnic cleansing, and it was a horrible part of the wars in Yugoslavia. Worth reading about. I think, you know, in the same way that I'm saying our willingness to confront the horrors of the Holocaust, we should also be willing to confront the horrors of the wars in Bosnia, the nationalist, hate-based politics of the Serbian government, Serbian nationalism against the Muslim minority in the region controlled by Serbia. We need to be able to confront, we need to be willing to confront those human realities. Let's turn now to the question of perpetrators. We're going to talk about Eichmann in a minute, but what would be, from the movies, for example, what's the picture that we have of the Nazi SS, I don't know, killer? What picture do you have of the psychology of the Nazi member of the Gestapo and his horrible laugh and his willingness to kill at the drop of a hat? How do you understand the psychology of that Nazi Gestapo type?
It's almost like he isn't human. He's just evil. He's just pure evil.
Just,
does whatever he wants.
Exactly. Completely evil, completely different from Evelyn and Keon and Dan. I'm Dan. Completely different from us. Just an evil personification of hatred and ideology and so forth. Okay, so that's a picture that we have of the Nazi perpetrator. Why is Browning so shocking to us? Why is the Ordinary Men book so shocking to us? Yeah, go ahead, Mahil. Yeah.
Okay, I kind of really was like into this because Hannah did this as well, Arendt. She was trying to characterize the Nazis in a way that showed you that her definition of an evil was the correct definition, or like the banality of evil, she called it. That was like a topic that I felt like was very complex in a way, and it helped like explain a lot. But in terms of like what Browning said, he literally deliberately named the title Ordinary Men rather than calling them villains who support the master race, or, you know, inhuman people. These guys, he's saying, these guys were just like us. They were just told by the highest authorities to go kill Jews, and they had, I guess, a moral dilemma doing so. And they also, like, I also remember hearing like in the book, well, I'm not reading, I mean readings through the book, where it says that they had to like think of ways to blame the Jews for what's going on, like saying, hey, the Jews did this to harm Germany, so this is me justified for killing the Jews. Mm-hmm. And I kind of just, that's what I kind of saw about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a kind of a second level political motivation. It's a way of leaders inducing followers to do horrible things. And that is to characterize the potential victim as a traitor, as disloyal, as trying to harm people. I think you're probably aware of the idea of, it's a really deep idea in anti-Semitism. It goes back to the Middle Ages, but blood lies, which are, the term is blood lies, lies against Jews, against the Jewish community, of horrible things that Jewish people were accused of during the Middle Ages. And those blood lies perpetuated themselves through many centuries. It has nothing to do with reality. It's kind of like QAnon crazy stuff saying Democrats are stealing children. I imagine that you've heard that crazy conspiracy kind of theory, which is offered by QAnon. These blood lies against Jews, what's the function of lies like that? Well, it is to dehumanize. It's to say, these are not even human beings. These are insects, these are rats, these are mice, these are rodents. Killing Jews is entirely justified, or fill in the blank. Killing Hutus is entirely justified. Killing Muslims is entirely justified. They're not human, they're not like us. That language of dehumanizing discourse is, well, we might say, we've got an important discovery here. Because if we're asking ourselves the question, how can it happen? This discourse of dehumanizing some human beings that's an important clue. How is it an important clue? Well, because it facilitates a kind of barbaric cruelty, which we would otherwise think, no human being could be willing to do this. To kill a child, you would have to be a deranged monster to kill a child. But if part of this ideological thinking, these are not real children, they're monster children, they're not real children, they're dehumanized, they're insects, in other words, that language of hatred, that language of dehumanization, that is itself a mechanism of genocidal murder. Gosh, I said a pretty strong thing there. A mechanism of genocidal murder. Okay, I think that might be, yep. Yeah, great. Okay, I don't know what's going on with the Zoom, but everybody else is in. I'm going to put you on speakerphone if you would like to participate. I'm also recording the session so you can see what you missed, but I'm really sorry. I don't know what's going on. I tried to admit you about. Okay, yeah, it's probably on your side because a bunch of others are here. But if you would like to be on speakerphone, you can hear, and as I say, you can also watch the video once I post it. But I'll put you on speaker. There we go. Okay, how's that for being a problem solver, folks? Jason is in, but through my telephone. Okay, so we're just talking about genocidal motivations. The reason why I'm thinking this is an important point to emphasize is if we really are committed to never again, then maybe we should also be committed to never engaging in language which dehumanizes our opponents. Where have we, in our own American politics, where have we heard a kind of dehumanizing language? Can you think of any examples in the past, 5, 10 years, dehumanizing political language?
What, I forgot his name. The guy who was head of the KKK. He's still around. Yes, I think of him a lot. Some of the things he says are kind of like, how is this guy getting away with saying all this stuff? But freedom of speech, he can say what he wants. But
okay, good. Other examples? I mean, good and bad, good and horrible. You're absolutely right. David Duke is a racist, white supremacist organization leader, says incredibly racist things about African American people. So that's a good example. Other examples. Is there still anti-Semitism in this country, would you say? Jason is saying yes. You got an example, Jason?
Not really.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, we have the examples I would give you, because I kind of follow, there's the center in, it's called the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has been going for 30 years or so, tracking hate groups and hate crimes. And the hate crimes against synagogues and temples have risen quite a bit in the past 4 years. So defacement of a synagogue or a temple, arson at synagogues has increased. Physical attacks on people leaving synagogues has increased over time. So anti-Semitism in our country exists. But right now I'm just asking about language. What about the language of, I don't mean to be political in this class, but the language of candidate Trump in talking about rapists and murderers coming across the border. What does that, what kind of language, what does that suggest about human beings? Mexican immigrants, Mexican people coming into the United States are rapists and murderers. Do you remember when candidate Trump said that in almost his first big public speech? And what does it actually imply about how, you know, if you listen with attention to his language, what does it imply about how you should think about Mexican non-documented people in this country? Are they our moral equal, for example?
No, he's basically saying they're lesser than. And the reason why his language and language like that coming from people who are in positions of authority is so bad is because you're empowering all the people that you are above to treat these people as lesser than. And that's why it's so damaging. Even, you know, when we say things like that, it is damaging, but especially when it's coming from higher ups. You're empowering people who are already have these tendencies to believe such things to go out and act on such beliefs. And I think that's the best thing.
Excellent. No, you're entirely right. That is the mechanism which I think we should all be fearful of. Because if language is adopted, the Jim Crow period is, I think we could say a very similar thing about the Jim Crow period. The language of Southern white power holders in speaking derogatorily about young African-American men and women, speaking of them as in ways which were demeaning, disrespectful, mistrustful, fearful. What did that also enhance? Well, it enhanced things like lynchings and violent attacks on Black people in the South for, you know, not for crimes, but for just ordinary everyday actions. So in other words, partly what I'm getting at is, here is a reason why we would want to pay attention to the Nazi period. It's one very specific thing. If we really want to say never again, no more Holocaust, no more genocide, then we should also be saying no more hateful diminishment of other human beings in a language. I don't for a moment mean to say that Donald Trump was looking to stimulate genocidal action against Hispanic and Latino people in this country. But the implication of the language is an implication which, if unchecked, can lead to violence. And violence can be small scale or it can be large scale. So, okay, so that's a kind of a concrete mechanism. I was asking you the question, what's our stereotype of the Nazi Gestapo officer? And our stereotype is an ideologue, an ideological a person who's all in for the Nazi ideology, who's able to quote chapter and verse from Mein Kampf, Nazi from beginning to end, and willing to hurt and harm and kill in the name of the Nazi ideology. That's kind of the way we think of the Nazi soldier. That's why I find it so shocking to read Browning and to realize, no, that's not the nature of these ordinary German policemen who became very cooperative killers in Poland and the Ukraine. They became very willing to kill large numbers, thousands. I mean, there's one unit, thousands of Jewish men, women, and children, and they were very ordinary. They were very similar to you and me and the people that we know. And what does that imply to us? Well, does it imply that, maybe in our society too, it's possible for pretty ordinary people to do terrible things to other people? And what would facilitate that? Well, we have to kind of think it through a little bit. This is not a good analogy, but I was pretty shocked during the COVID epidemic about meatpacking plants. And meatpacking plants in the Midwest and the South have a lot of Central American people, often undocumented, who work in those plants. Did you know that? That a lot of the workforce in meatpacking and chicken disassembly plants are undocumented Latino, Latinx people. And on top of that, those meatpacking plants have had a not very good record of COVID safety. Did you know that? So there have been some pretty serious outbreaks, including deaths of workers in meatpacking plants. Do you think there's any connection there between the racial, ethnic, linguistic background of the workers and the inattention which the Iowa Department of Health gave to health conditions? I don't want to be careless in what I'm suggesting, but what I'm kind of suggesting is, does racism and does hateful language, like regrettably what candidate Trump made use of, does that make it easier to look the other way when conditions are really awful in a awful or just subnormal, sub careful? OSHA, the Occupation Safety and Health Agency, did in fact find that several of these big meatpacking plants in, Iowa, middle America, did find that they were guilty of safety violations leading to death, and they were fined. They were fined for these violations. Want to guess? $15 million fine, $15 fine, or $15,000 fine? What do you think? Killed some people because of poor health conditions in the plant. Is that a $15 issue, a $15,000 issue, or a $15 million issue from a punitive point of view? What's your guess? Keita, what do you think?
I would think that I think it should be a $15 million issue. I'm just not sure if that's actually how it happened.
Right. So you're entirely right. If you want to deter an organization from doing careless things about worker safety, and if you're doing it through penalties, the penalties need to be significant. OSHA's penalty was $15,000 for both instances. 2 plants, $15,000 per plant. Not a meaningful penalty. And well, I'm not quite sure exactly where I'm going with this because I don't know that it's a matter of racism, but there's at least the risk that it's a matter of racism. And okay, never again. If we want to be certain that our society is not vulnerable to, I don't know what you want to call it, genocide, not vulnerable to careless killing of innocent people, or perhaps intentional killing of innocent people, then maybe a good place to start is not to use racist language that diminishes people, that basically says, who cares? They're just these immigrants, and they don't really count. In fact, and this is kind of, I suppose I should keep a little collection of interesting things I see in the newspaper, but a Minnesota judge basically said something to that effect. A case before her had to do with a meatpacking plant in Minnesota, and her statement was, well, these were just immigrants who were hurt. What do you think of that? What kind of reaction would you have to that statement? Evelyn, what do you think? Or,
Yeah,
go ahead. Ray, why don't you speak, and then Evelyn can add what she has to say.
Okay, I was just shocked when you just said it. I didn't think I heard correctly. She said just immigrants?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, that's disgusting. And you're no, that's unacceptable.
She was a judge.
A judge, your job is to look out for those who cannot do so themselves through the law, and you're demeaning these people in the workplace and openly saying that it doesn't matter because they were just immigrants. I find that appalling.
Appalling. Okay, good. Evelyn, what were you going to say? I put you on the spot, so.
Well, no, I think appalling is a fitting word, but Ray, I've actually been thinking a lot about, you said at the very beginning of our discussion that the willingness to talk about these things, and I think making an actionable decision to do so, whether it be in your education or understanding of other people, translates into an actionable participation in present history. And I think, well, then applying this to how the judge dealt with this issue, this thing that happened, I think it's a representation of how people don't take action in understanding other people and in understanding and educating themselves. But then I guess taking that to the next level, to the next step, what I personally struggle with is, where's the boundary between personally educating and understanding history and then moving into that actionable present instead of just actionable understanding.
Mm-hmm. So how does Mahil move from, yes, I now understand how horrible it is to be a Ukrainian peasant, starved to death over 4 months, gradually dying. Now I understand it, but so what? Your question, Evelyn, is what's the connection between the understanding and some kind of action? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And what do you think? Do you think that if we understand state-created suffering better, that we have maybe more of an ability to see when a state is about to create that kind of situation, and maybe more of a motivation to express ourselves, that shouldn't happen? Because that would be kind of a theory of action. Yeah, go ahead, Evelyn.
Yeah, well, I also think even saying it should be less specific than that, because ultimately that's the goal, that in a specific situation you should be able to recognize that. But I think it should be a pattern of education and a pattern of mingling historical understanding and historical action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really get specific there, but that's something I need to think about and reflect on.
And interestingly enough, it's something I've been wrestling with as well in a piece of scholarly writing, because I'm adding to a contribution that I wrote about the philosophy of history, which you have to update every 5 years. It's in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And I decided that I would update by adding a section on understanding the 20th century. And I asked exactly this question. Number one, it's really crucial for us to try to understand and to confront in a lot of fullness the reality of the Holocaust and the Holodomor and the incredibly evil, horrific circumstances of the 20th century. But then what? And what I put forward is, and then as human beings, we have more of an understanding that we must intervene. We must take some action. And if it has to do with our own government, then we must take action with and through our own government. And if it's a matter of protest, in other words, what I'm wanting to put forward is the idea that by better understanding, we have more of a motivation to try to intervene also. Have any of you read about the separation of children at the border, which the Trump immigration policies have created? The cages, the separation of children, the losing of children? Losing them. The immigration system has now lost a bunch of these children. They can't locate the children, or they can't locate the children and the parents. That's pretty horrible. Jason, were you going to say something?
Nah.
Okay. Pretty horrible. Is it something we can just kind of check the box? Yes, bad stuff happening at the border. Or, now that we've kind of thought more about the Holocaust, are we also thinking, wait a minute, did you say 3-year-old children are being taken from their moms and put in cages? Is that what you said our government is doing? Do we as citizens have to express our disgust at such a policy? The cages have been closed. No, actually, I think Biden has announced that no more cages, no more children snatched from their parents. But is it as bad as gas chambering people? No, it's not. Is it horrible and horrific? And could you imagine this being done to you as a mom or a dad? Could you imagine it being done to you as a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old child? Yeah, I think we can imagine those things happening, and we can imagine how horrible they are. And we can then see, no, we don't want anything to do with our government doing such a horrible thing. And we want to be, kind of responsive to Evelyn's question. We want to do something. We want to take some kind of step. We'd like to kind of think that anyway. How many people actually do take such a step? Well, that's the Ordinary Men book actually gives us a little bit of an answer, because out of 200 ordinary men who were called out at dawn somewhere in Poland and said, men, I've got a pretty unpleasant assignment for you, and you don't have to do it. If you don't feel like you're up to it, you don't have to do it. But we have a task in front of us. There are 5,000 Jews in this town. We have to find them and we have to kill them. But if you can't do it, just step aside. We'll give you other work. What percentage of people said they couldn't do it? It was a small percentage. It was 20% or some number like that. It was a small minority of people who said, no, I can't do it. Shocking. Shocking, and yet not completely inexplicable. There's social psychology, for example. There's a social psychology experiment that I read about recently. So put yourselves in this situation. You've been, your professor of psychology has recruited you into a study, and he's told you, okay, you're going to be in a cubicle. There are going to be 15 or 20 cubicles in our lab, and you're going to be talking on the phone to someone in the next room, and you're pretending that you are a customer service agent, and you're just getting some information from this person. Okay, you got it so far? You're in the cubicle, you got the phone, you got the headset actually, you don't have to hold the phone. And midway through the conversation, for each of you independently, none of you has any connection to each other, independently in your cubicle. You're talking with the person, they're asking you for IT help or something like that. And then they suddenly say, and they say, I'm having an attack. And then you hear a thud. Okay, now the question is, what happens next? And what would you like to imagine happens next? It's in a psychology experiment. Ray, what would you like to have imagined? And then I'm going to ask Yasmin, if Yasmin is there. I don't see you, but I see your name. What would you like to imagine would happen? Something totally unexpected happened in this experiment.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that personally, if I was there, I'd hear that and I would call 911. Hopefully, I don't know if I know the person's location or I can like help them locate that person and, you know, let my manager, whoever, know that this is what just happened and I'm calling the police and, you know, we should definitely check up on this person. But I'm assuming this did not happen.
Okay, so that's what we would like to imagine that we do. Yasmin, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, would you like to offer a theory about what you would want to imagine would happen and maybe what did happen?
I think same thing that Ray said, but I think in reality, some people would respond differently. Some people would want to help that person, but other people might kind of not care or just not know what to do in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Anybody else have a theory or an observation here?
Some people might just be frozen and they might just not do anything at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think the results are that about 20%, I don't know that it's meaningful, it's the same percentage, but a small percentage actually do something. They throw their headset down, they jump up, they go out of the cubicle and they say, something horrible happened. We have to help this person. But that's 20%. And the other 80% take no action at all. And what's really pretty interesting about this social psychology stuff is that these are just ordinary college students. So they're like you, they're like me when I was a college student. It's a little grim, isn't it? To imagine that ordinary people have a hard time responding in an ordinary, sympathetic, human concern way to an unexpected circumstance. There's a whole range of social experiments, social psychology experiments. There's something called the Milken experiment, which Milken prison experiment it's called. And so there's a warden and there's you and there are a couple of guards and there's a dial and you're told to turn the dial and it gives a mild electric shock to the prisoner. And you're then told, okay, turn it now to, so it's 0 to 10, you're at 2. This is a mild pain, but it's okay, just go ahead and put it at 2. Now I want you to go up to 4. 10 is a killing shock. And the question is, how far will the college student subject be willing to turn the dial? And the shocking reality is almost to 10, very, very high. The shocking reality is that ordinary people in the Milken prison experiment are willing to do what they're told because why? How would you understand that? Tabitha, how would you understand that? You're in the experiment, and the experimenter has told you there's a real person next door. She is getting a little bit of a shock, and it's more every time you turn the dial. But that's what the experiment is. So I just want you to go ahead and turn the dial. How can you understand the experiment that most subjects will, in fact, turn the dial pretty high? In other words, impose a lot of pain simply because they're told to.
Like how, are you asking like how I understand that or how like I might respond to that?
I'm asking more, how do you understand it? How could an ordinary person, if I were to say to you, okay, this is a little experiment on my part, I'd like you to walk outside your house. The first old person you see walking down the street, I want you to knock them over. It's just an experiment. None of you would do that, I don't think, right? I'm hoping that I correctly understand you. You're human beings. You have empathy for people. You're not going to knock over old people walking by on the street simply because your lunatic professor said he wanted to do a little experiment on you. And yet, these social psychology experiments, Milken experiment, I can name 2 or 3 others if you are interested. There's also the Stanford prison experiment, which has a different, I mean, these are kind of appalling experiments, frankly. But how do we understand it? What would be the psychological state of the person who's willing to keep turning it higher and higher?
I think people are.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I definitely associated with Eichmann about the blind willingness to follow authority, even if it means harming your fellow man, hurting other people.
Okay, so following authority, following instructions. If the situation is set that it's an experiment and the experimenter has the authority to tell you what to do, then you're kind of relieved of the responsibility. That's kind of what you're suggesting, Jason. Tabitha, what were you going to say?
I don't think it even goes that deep about the putting the blame on people. I think it's just feel like you don't want to do something, like people don't want to do something wrong, so they just go along with whatever the person in command tells them to do. Okay,
so they're just a cog, and then we understand the experimental subject as conforming. Conforming, maybe that's the word I should be looking for. Maybe that's the word you're looking for. Tabitha, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I thought of like my response to the discussion post, because I think your question was pretty similar to this. And I thought of it like people who would in that situation decide to like do what they're being told. They're either one, scared to say something like that's not right, I'm not going to do that, or they feel like they're in a position where like that's not really their place to say something, or they feel like I said in my discussion post, that maybe the people thought that it wasn't them who were actually causing the harm, but it was like the person who was telling them to do it. And so they were basically like being used as a weapon to kill other people. And so people might think that that's actually what's happening, and it's like not their fault that they can't like say no, but that's just a position that they're in, and so they won't stand up against it.
Okay, so they're conforming, and they're maybe rationalizing their conforming as this is my role, this is what I'm supposed to do. Okay, Ray, yeah, go ahead.
So I'm actually in a psych class this semester, and we studied this experiment, and they actually, so they altered it a little bit, and they found that, I'm just gonna read a little portion of my notes. They found that obedience was highest when the person giving the orders was close at hand. So the person was actually sitting there, and you'd say, I want to stop. They'd say, no, you must go on for the sake of the experiment. So obedience was highest then. When the person giving orders was perceived to be a legitimate authority figure, so I guess you trusted their judgment above yours, that the authority figure was supported by a powerful or prestigious institution, and the victim was depersonalized and at a distance. So I think that's a really important factor. They weren't in the same room, so you didn't see, you heard, because I watched the video, you heard the screams, but it was a lot easier to continue when you didn't see the person struggling because of you. And there were no role models for defiance. So you were alone doing the experiment, so there weren't other people who were doing the same thing and were saying, no, I'm going to stop, and stopped. It was just you. So since no one else was there and defying and saying, no, I'm not going to do this, you naturally went on with it as well. So
it's a good description of kind of the situation of the person doing this stuff. So that's really great. Thank you. So obedience versus defiance. There are many situations in ordinary life. Bullying is, I mean, it's a really minor, trivial compared to mass killing. And yet bullying has a lot in common with this kind of conformance and obedience. I guess I'm kind of thinking of when my children were little, and the kind of mobbing behavior that sometimes happens with 12-year-olds, where there might be one or two kids who are really kind of cruel. And then others who are just kind of thinking, well, that's what's going on here. I guess I kind of need to conform to that. So that copying and conforming to the objectively bad behavior which is going on, I guess we've probably all seen that kind of behavior in the past. How hard is it to be defiant? How hard is it to be not willing to comply with this mistreatment of the child or the pal or the person who's the object of bullying? By the way, who gets bullied? Is it big, strong people who get bullied, or is it who do you think gets bullied? What is the dynamic of bullying?
Well, in my experience, I was different. So that's why I was bullied. It's always the odd one out, right? So it's, the one who's perceived as different, weak. In the movies, it's always the weak, noodly armed child that's getting bullied by big, strong upperclassmen and whatnot. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so bullying is it's kind of a dynamic. I don't mean, it almost trivializes the Holocaust to say we can find these other parts of ordinary life which maybe help us understand the behavior better. And yet I kind of think that may be true, that the compliance of these ordinary men, for example, maybe part of their reasoning, part of their thought process, their social psychology is, these are my pals. I can't look weak or it looks like they're going along, so why would I be different? I need to conform. Maybe that's a part of the explanation. I think we would all like to believe that we would recognize the reality of the situation. This is a horror we're being asked to contribute to, and we won't do it. We simply won't do it. We would like to think that, and I think it's probably true in some circumstances. For each of us, there would be circumstances where we would be defiant. We would not go along, but there are probably other circumstances where maybe we would, not necessarily to kill people, but to bully or to be insulting or be a mean guy or a mean girl type of harasser. So in other words, there's kind of social psychology here. We've got only 12 minutes left, and yet we haven't gotten to the banality of evil. So maybe we're kind of talking about the banality of evil. But I came to a completely shocking realization as I prepared the lecture. If you haven't viewed the lecture or the slides, you need to, because it's got a shocking conclusion. The most famous idea which Hannah Arendt comes forward with is her interpretation of Eichmann and her idea that he represents the banality of evil, that she has this kind of slightly arrogant way about her. He's kind of stupid. He's not very talented. He didn't achieve much in his life. He really is just this compliant cog. That's kind of the view that she takes, that he did terrible things and he did it in a kind of banal, everyday way, which requires me answer a different kind of question. But about Eichmann, he's not a master of evil. He's not like a comic strip ideologue. He is just a kind of ordinary guy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he did some bad stuff. That's the banality of evil theory. What's really interesting is that her theory, her interpretation has been refuted. Refuted. She's wrong about Eichmann. Go ahead, Mahil.
Well, historians say that her idea of evil and banality of evil was very informative and well, but they say it does not apply to Eichmann because he was more of an architect of the Nazi state rather than just some guy following the cogs.
Exactly.
He was an anti-Semitist. He proved it through various actions.
So you're so right. And what's so interesting to me, the reason I'm smiling is it's just kind of an interesting accident. The man you're quoting is Browning, the Ordinary Man author. And so he is quoted in the slides and in the lecture. But the view is this more recent interpretation of Eichmann is based on interviews which he gave to another Nazi after, I mean, it's a crazy story. The story of Eichmann is a completely insane story. He was captured by the American army at the very end of the war, before hostilities were completed. He was captured and he was confined. He was detained in a detention center, but it was a kind of a low security detention center, and they were sent out to do farming, and he just walked away. So he eluded American detention and then went on to live under an assumed name in Germany for another 5 years. This is insane. Under the pseudonym, you'll never guess his pseudonym, Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann. What a great pseudonym for Adolf Eichmann. He dropped the I out of Eichmann and he became Eichmann. He then found, through presumably a Nazi network, a Catholic priest who helped him get papers to emigrate to Buenos Aires, Argentina, which was a haven for lots of Nazis. And they refused to give up their Nazis, including the horrible physician who did the unspeakable experiments on prison camp survivors. Mengele, is that his name? He was a nightmare doctor who did medical experiments on concentration camp inmates to the death. He was also in Argentina. The Israelis became aware of the location of Eichmann because a victim, I mean, this is an amazing story. It should be a movie. It probably is a movie. A victim recognized him in Buenos Aires, recognized Eichmann, and got information eventually to the Israeli government that Eichmann was in Buenos Aires. Mossad, which is the secret service of the state of Israel, then did some very careful observation. They located him in Buenos Aires. They confirmed that he was indeed Eichmann, and they then kidnapped him. And from the account that I read, it was kind of touch and go. They tried to snatch him, and he was so vigorous and resisting that it took 3 of them to bundle him into the car and stuff him down on the floor of the car and take off. Anyway, they got him back to Israel, and they tried him in Israel. While he was in Buenos Aires, he gave hours and hours of interviews, like, I don't know, 30 or 40 hours of interviews to, I give the name in the slides, I can't remember his name now, but he was a Nazi sympathizer, maybe Nazi party member, journalist who interviewed Eichmann, and Eichmann was completely explicit in what his beliefs were. So in the year 2000, 2002 or so, another book, Eichmann Before Jerusalem, was published. And in that book, the woman gives what she thinks is and what other historians have come to agree, a much more accurate view of Eichmann, not as a banal doer of evil, but as a committed Nazi, an anti-Semite, deep in his bones, completely committed to genocide, to the destruction of the Jews, completely committed to the work that he was doing, completely proud of the work that he did as an architect of the murder of millions of Jews, just regretful that they didn't finish the job. In other words, now this is why, well, it's interesting for our class in so many different ways, but it's interesting in this particular way. Hannah Arendt was she was a top philosopher. She was very, very smart. She wrote a really important book about totalitarianism, I don't know, 5-10 years earlier than this book. She really understood very deeply many things. She observed Eichmann and she read many, many documents during the process of observing the trial. And yet she was deceived. She misunderstood Eichmann. In the most basic way, she misunderstood Eichmann. She misinterpreted Eichmann. She interpreted him as a cog in the machine and not an architect. There's a really, really interesting quote, which, it's in the slides, but I'd like to read you the quote. "The trouble with Eichmann was precisely that so many were like him, and that the many were neither perverted nor sadistic, These people were not perverted or sadistic. They were still terribly, terrifyingly normal. And Eichmann, she's basically saying, Eichmann was terribly, terrifyingly normal. From the viewpoint of our legal institutions and our moral standards of judgment, this normality was much more terrifying than all the atrocities put together. For it implied, as had been said at Nuremberg over and over again by the defendants and their counsels, that this new type of criminal, who is in actual fact, bunch of Latin, commits his crime under circumstances that make it well nigh impossible for him to know or to feel that he is doing wrong. Just a cog, just an unconscious, unthoughtful, non-moral conveyor of Nazi program. That's the way that she has understood him. And the subsequent interpretation is completely different from that. He was not just a normal guy. He was an anti-Semite. He was a career Nazi. He was deeply committed to Nazi ideology. And basically she was taken in. She was deceived by an act that he was putting on to exonerate himself. That is such an interesting discovery in my, I don't know, maybe I'm making too much of it. But I think it is important because this political idea of hers, this kind of theoretical idea of the banality of evil, that has become a real kind of singular idea about the nature of the Holocaust. And as Mahil correctly points out, Christopher Browning thinks it's not completely wrong, but it's not true of Eichmann, and it's not true of many of the Nazi perpetrators, that they were real Nazis. They were not just innocent men who somehow, men and women sometimes, who got themselves involved in the Nazi program, and they're not responsible themselves, other people are responsible. This interpretation is, it's a very different one. It basically says we need to understand a lot of Nazi behavior as very deliberate and purposeful and deranged and demented and crazy, but purposeful and responsible. So I just found that really, really interesting for our purposes. I kind of link it back to some passages in Mark Bloch's book. Do you remember when Mark Bloch is asking the question, do direct observations of historical events have greater credibility than the interpretations of later historians? And he's basically making the point, no, we really have to work very hard to get to the truth of a historical period or an historical event. I think that Hannah Arendt is kind of illustrating that fact, that she was observing, she was trying her very best to make sense of this man and his role in the Holocaust, and yet she got it wrong. Her interpretation was incorrect, apparently. So I think that's very interesting. So we're just about at the end here. I have a thought about next week, and my thought is to give you a break. And the break is that you've been very diligent in doing a white paper every week and doing a quick questions, quizzy kind of thing every week. I know that you're finishing your papers and you've got a lot on your plates now. And so my inclination is to excuse you from that final assignment. So I'm going to take the white paper and quick questions off the assignment for next week. Please do the reading. I want to have a good discussion next week, and there will be a discussion question, but you won't need to do a white paper, and you'll have a little bit more time to get your papers done and your other coursework done. I'm seeing 1 or 2 smiles out there, so I think this is a hit decision. This is a compassionate decision on my part, and anyway, it's something I had been thinking about, and I think it'll make your lives a little bit easier. Okie doke. 1 more week and 1 more discussion of Holocaust and Eichmann, but also of Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and his different way of responding to the Nazi period. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation. Okay, thanks. Be well.
Can I ask you a question after you're done?
I do have a question.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll stay on. Yeah. Great. And what were you
I
saying?
have a question as well too about the essay that we're writing.
Okay, well, why don't you stay on? Anybody who wants to have, kind of an impromptu office hour, you can stay on. And otherwise, if you don't want to have that, you can just pop off. I won't close the meeting in that case, so we can go on discussing a little bit. Okie doke. So let's start with Mahil since he first asked. Yeah.
Okay, like I'm trying to do the first topic where it's about Islamic science and Copernican astronomy.
Oh, good. Great.
I did the research on it, but do you want me to focus, or us to focus, whoever else is doing the first topic? Do you want us to focus on like one Islamic astronomer or two, or do you want us to focus like a generic band?
No,
Like,
well, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
oh no, that's fine. I found two that I really like to talk about, and they had each one has like their own most influential work or book about that was used by Copernicus himself as a source. But I'm not sure if you want me to take in like multiple astronomers or just those two or
Well,
one.
I'm quite happy to have you pick out one or two that you think are important, or that you've kind of come. I realize you're not going to become an expert through this process, but pick out one or two. That is a perfectly good way to pursue this.
Okay.
I'm really happy you're doing it, in fact.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else on that?
Good.
Okay, good.
I have a question.
Yep, got a question from Austin. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so I'm doing my essay on comparing the fight for civil rights and the fight against apartheid.
Right.
And I could have sworn in high school hearing about one or more incidents with the U.S. government used force against civil rights protesters, bringing out fire hoses and dogs.
Yes.
But for the life of me, I can't find them. I can't find the name of any of those incidents on Google. I'm trying to find something to compare. I'm trying to find something that would best compare and contrast with the Sharpeville massacre.
Right. Yeah. So one name that you can Google is Bull Connor, who's the mayor, I think, of maybe Birmingham. I'm going to Google myself for a second, but Bull Connor was the very brutal chief of police.
Okay.
Okay, so let me see if I can, both Montgomery and Birmingham had major demonstrations which were put down by massive use of force, dogs and fire hoses and so forth. So you're absolutely right. There is that history in the US civil rights history. I'm trying to think if I could give you I think with those clues, that'll probably give you some help to, kind of get some additional sources.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I needed the name.
Okay, good. Tabitha, were you next? Were you going to raise a question about your paper?
Yeah, so I haven't decided on a topic yet, but during class, I thought of something that I might like to pursue. You asked the question on like what we really mean by like never again when we say that when it comes to the Holocaust. And so I was thinking about that and like, I don't know if we really discussed this in particular in class, but like how schools, particularly in America, could like change their teaching of the Holocaust, how it's presented. Because what my experience and what I've heard from other students is that in high school, middle school, we didn't really like focus on, we did focus on some personal stories of the Holocaust, but we don't have like a full understanding, like a complete understanding of what happened and like why it's super important.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of wanted to maybe present like some of Mark Bloch's ideas on how to study history.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked what, I think it was Ray, she mentioned, or you mentioned first, how we need to like create a community where people are willing to learn about the past and like why it's important, and to just like create a community where we can actually take steps toward never again. So I wanted to like write about that. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
But I just had a couple ideas. And so I was wondering if that'd be a topic you think I could pursue.
Yeah, so it's a good set of questions that you got. And here's what I suggest. try to formulate it as kind of a 2 or 3 sentence description of purpose. Send it to me. I will then send it back to you with any suggestions I might have. But I like very much everything you just said. I think is valuable. What I'm kind of thinking about is that you want to have a focused argument and a focused analysis that kind of makes sense in terms of developing an argument through the paper. But that sounds good.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay, who's next? On my screen, Evelyn seems to be next. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I have been doing a little bit of research about Ezra Pound, and I was going to choose that as my topic.
Mhm.
But this might be a bit of a stretch, but I want to kind of connect how individual identity plays a role in how people act in history and how they formulate ideas. And I wanted to use Professor Mueller's talk. I don't know exactly how I can integrate them, but I think what she said a lot about individual identity, or if there's something better that I can use that's more specifically related than what she was talking about, or the person she was talking about. But would I be able to use I think the last part of her lecture and her talk about just really, I think, how identity plays a large role in how you interact with present history.
Right. And by identity, do you mean character, or do you mean the person's? What do you mean by identity, really?
Yeah. So Pound had fascist ideals, and I kind of thought about, I forget the name of who she was researching for a biography, but her identity as a Jew and a communist really affected how she lived her life.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of want to parallel that.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting. So it's really, really interesting. And with Ezra Pound, I don't know how deep his fascism, how far back it went, and what it derived from. That all by itself is an interesting topic. What did it come from in his own development? So yeah, I think there's a lot to, and I really like the idea of connecting it to Anna Mueller's talk.
So well, maybe after I get some more thoughts down, I'll send you something. But I just don't want to kind of have too broad of a scope and not end up saying anything at all.
Yeah. One thing that I think would be very feasible, if there were some part of Anna's or Professor Mueller's talk that you were especially interested in, I think she'd be willing to share with you a chapter, or I shouldn't speak for her, but I bet that she would be willing to do that. But why don't you give a little thought to exactly how you'd like to focus, and if it would be useful. I know that you can send her a note and say you'd like to write a little bit about what she spoke on. Did she have anything in writing that you could refer to?
Okay. Yeah.
If you wanted to, but you're not committed to that.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Great. Okay, good. Evelyn. And Ray is coming back. And Tabitha, what's on your mind?
I'm sorry, I just stayed in here. I'm just typing up a couple ideas, and I'll shoot you an email with them.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you.
Good, you bet. Very happy. Let me go to Gina, who's been waiting, and then Ray, I'll come back to you. Gina?
Oh, I'm only here to really see if there's anything that I could use.
Okay.
So I'm just kind of observing.
Okay, that's fine. Glad to have you. Ray, what's up on your?
Okay, so I think it was the week before Thanksgiving break when we discussed something, and it was kind of similar to what Tabitha was talking about, but I was thinking more about the connection between an emotional and personal understanding of history, and I guess how important that is, in terms of, we were also talking about moral action as well. This is very abstract, obviously. I don't know how I would tackle such a topic. So I was wondering if you had any ideas just hearing this right now, or If not, I was gonna go with the same topic Jason was doing, the civil rights movement in America and the apartheid movement. But I'm also really interested in why it's important to emotionally understand history and to personalize historical figures.
So one thought I have is, I like that topic. I think that'd be a great topic. One thought I have is to refer you to this revised essay on the philosophy of history that I've just, it's been revised and now it's posted. So you can find it easily. It's the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and it's my essay on philosophy of history. But the last two sections, you don't have to read the whole essay, it's quite long, but the last two sections, one is 20th century history, and the next section is called Moral Issues in Philosophy of History. You might find either some ideas there that are relevant or some references that are relevant. You know, some things that you could locate. I have a lot of that material on PDF. So if there were some reference that you thought was, you'd like to pursue it further, I could share it with you.
All right. You said your essay was, what was the name of it again?
It's called Philosophy of History. So if you go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which you can find easily by Google, then if you just type in philosophy of history, you'll find my essay.
All right, perfect.
But there's also actually, this class actually influenced quite a bit what I put into that essay. You might find it interesting, but I put in a little bit about Mark Bloch also in an earlier part. So you might just, once you got the essay, you might search for Bloch and see if there's some stuff about actor-centered history that would be of interest to you.
All right, thank you so much. This is a great starting point. It sounds pretty difficult to me still. I think it's a really big topic and I have a lot of ideas on it. And like, personally in my like educational history, I have a habit of like taking on topics that are a little too big for me. So I'll do some preliminary research and I'll let you know. If I find that it is too big for me to write, because the essay is due in 7 days, then I will just do the civil rights movement and then the apartheid one, but I'll look into this as well.
Okay, so a third possibility though is I think I could help you refine this topic down so it's not quite as big and quite as difficult. Maybe the thing for you to do is to do a quick, you know, your own reflective thinking about how you'd like to formulate the topic. And then if you want to send me an email, I will offer some suggestion about, you know, maybe I can be a little smarter about references that would be a quick way of you getting some traction on this topic.
Yeah.
I think I can help with that. So it's, you know, obviously it's your choice what you want to write on. But I do think this is a valuable topic.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Good. Okay. Anything from anybody else? Well, this is like a bonus for me. Bonus time. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
No problem. All right.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Yeah, you too, Jason. Thanks for coming on in this funny way. Bye-bye.